Hi there, this is Steve Kaufman again. Going to do a little video here on memory. This is a request from one of my viewers, Wakako. What do I consider to be the role of memory in language learning? I'd like to start with an example that I got from Oscar, one of our link members in Spain. We just had a conversation in Spanish. And we talked about memory, and he said, it's a bit like driving a car. When we drive a car, we do everything automatically because we have basically ingrained the habits, the patterns, all the things we need to do in order to drive a car. We do them automatically, and we can't remember the last 10 minutes of our ride, what we did, how we signaled or turned or braked or changed gears or whatever it might be. And I think language learning is a bit like that. Let me think of some other things that relate to memory. I read somewhere that they did a test with a group of two groups of 20 language learners. And the first group was given a list of 20, 30 words to learn, to study. And the second group was not given that list. Then they were asked to read a text. And there was no difference in the ability of these two groups to read this text. This was in the language that they were learning. And so what was being pointed out in that study was that being confronted with a lot of things to remember, we don't necessarily remember them very well. I have the experience when I read, sometimes for my Russian study, I'll read a play by Chekhov. And at the beginning of the play, they introduce all of the people who are in the play, the general and his daughter and so and his wife. And of course, as soon as I start reading the play, I can't remember who's who. I know that when I look up words in a dictionary, no sooner do I look up the words than I've forgotten what the meaning was. So I think memory is not a very good thing to rely on when speaking, sort of to review, because it's a bit like driving the car. You have to be able to produce these words and phrases automatically on the fly. When we're driving, I don't think we rely on memory. I don't think we try to remember something we read in a manual. When I'm reading the play, it's only after I've read the play quite a way through the play and I start to become comfortable with the characters in the play, occasionally referring back to the list of characters, that I become comfortable with who is who in the play. Similarly with words, it's only when I've seen the words in different contexts that they start to stick. So I think what we're dealing with in language learning is more a matter of establishing certain patterns in the brain so that initially things are new, primarily words and phrases, and gradually these become patterns. And the way the patterns are formed is I think it's a combination of the brain kind of absorbing a lot of input and starting to form its own patterns based on what it hears. But I think the brain also tries to rely on some logic that the brain has. And one good example is my favorite example of the third person singular in the present tense of English. It's the only one that changes. I go, you go, he goes. He went, they went, but he talks, she talks. So that always changes. And yet I would think that amongst even some very proficient speakers of English, even some native speakers of English, he don't go. People continue to make that mistake because the brain is saying the pattern is that this should be the same as all the others. And it's very difficult to remember via memory that the third person singular is the only one that's different. So I see language learning more as a matter of gradually getting used to something and allowing the brain to form the necessary patterns. And this requires a lot of exposure. tables. I have tried in German, in Russian, to memorize the tables. I mean, I don't have it handy here. I'd show you. I've printed out the list. I even tried, rather than having the list based, for every, say, noun, I'm talking about declensions of nouns, rather than having the list for masculine, feminine, neuter in the different cases, I actually tried to write a table where I would write the ending, oo, or whatever it might be, oi, and then all the nouns in the different cases and genders that correspond to that ending. So rather than starting with the one list, all of this stuff would have very short-term influence on me. So where I end up is that we're not talking memory so much in language learning. I think what we're talking about is two things, three. In fact, I get back to what I call the golden trinity of language learning: attitude, time on task, and attentiveness. Those are the three things, not memory. Memory doesn't make it into the golden trinity. So you want to learn the language, you like the language, you think you can do it, you can visualize yourself as a speaker of the language. So you got all of that. You're not afraid of it, you're not resisting it, you're not asking why do they do it that silly way. So your attitude is positive. That's number one. Number two, you're willing to spend a lot of time listening, reading while doing the dishes, reading when you have a chance, on the internet, newspapers, television, whatever it may be. You're willing to put a lot, and talking to people, to put a lot of time into the language. So that's two, time. So attitude, time. And the third one is attentiveness. Noticing things. You have to notice. Now, how do we notice? I mean, we've all had the experience that when Westerners go to, let's say, Japan, they think all the Japanese look alike. Japanese people have told me that they think all Westerners look alike, because initially they're just different. So we don't notice the individual differences. We just see they're different. And when I lived in Japan for 9 years, I found that foreigners all looked alike and the Japanese looked quite different from each other, because I spent most of my time looking at Japanese people. So that I had, therefore, sort of a background against which to notice things. And the same is true in language learning. When we first hit the language, everything is very strange. We don't notice much, except that it's very strange. And we start to learn a few words. Again, my favorite approach is to repetitively listen to limited content initially, and then I start to notice things. I start to save words and phrases in Link. I review them in flashcards. I find the flashcarding is good because I notice not only the word and the word ending, but I notice the phrase that was captured, and I might edit my phrase in Link so that I'm spending time on it. It's all helping me notice. And as I have more knowledge and more familiarity, as the brain has been exposed to more and more of it, I start to notice things that I didn't notice before. And so as we become, first of all, I'm motivated to learn. I'm spending the time. I'm trying deliberately to notice. I'm trying to notice when I read. I will underline certain phrases. I will underline certain cases. I will review them in my flashcards, which I really like doing now that I have them on my iPod Touch. It's become just about my favorite activity. I think it's really neat doing that, using the words and phrases that were in the text that I had just reviewed. So I'm cultivating this ability to notice, to be attentive, to direct we have to hear, even for pronunciation, we have to hear it. We have to notice how people pronounce. But for words, for rules of grammar, for all of these things, I don't think we can rely on memory. I think we have to rely on trying to notice within the context of a lot of exposure, and, of course, that we're motivated. So memory, I don't think is a big deal. I don't think people who have good memories are good language learners. I don't think musicians are good language learners. I don't think engineers are good language learners because they can understand grammar. I think it's a matter of paying attention, getting enough exposure, and really wanting to do it. So there you have it. As I run out of time, that's my view on the role of memory.